Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the first broadcast of This Week in El Salvador. First, as a disclaimer, I have to let it be known I am not a journalist. I've always been very fascinated by current events and certain political situations, but I'm hoping this will be a work in progress for myself and you will understand that that's exactly what it is. I'd first like to mention my reasons for broadcasting in English, the specific news issues, I should say economic and political propaganda issues dealing with El Salvador. First of all, I have noticed that there is a tremendous amount of negative media, mostly Western media, that deals with El Salvador. If you want to find any media of actually what's happening in El Salvador, you actually have to go to various Spanish broadcasting channels, I should say, that broadcast in the Spanish language. For instance, Un Solo is one of them. I also really like Tecnoboca. I highly recommend that you watch all of those because they're very informative. But for the most part, and I suppose there is a national news from El Salvador itself, but it's all in Spanish as well. Why is it important to have this reported in English? Well, just to go by what has happened in the past, generally the media through a country, for instance the United States, would tend to try to generate consent for some sort of punitive action. And the best way to do that is have extremely detrimental and negative information about the specific country that you're interested in. In this case, that country that they are interested in possibly destroying is El Salvador. As to the reasons why such a action is necessary, that's what I hope to explore in this segment and forthcoming segments as well. Just to give you a little bit of background in terms of my interests, my wife is from El Salvador, and I've been very familiar with the situations involving El Salvador for certainly at least the last 20 years. I believe that within the last 3 years that Nayib Bukele has been president and the political party has been in charge of things. Well, I should say they represent at least 3/4, the Nuevas Ideas party, and the members of the Untitled, which are also people, and all young people under the age of 30 mostly, very idealistic. They're literally forming a new country. And it has been very difficult for them because there has been a tremendous amount of corruption there, and unfortunately corruption that has been encouraged and sponsored by other governments. Unfortunately, at least in the past, it has been the US government. Sadly, but that's the case. Just to go through some of the types of negative media that I'm talking about. Here is an example of something from, let me see, this is Al Jazeera. It says El Salvadorians at risk, inside El Salvador's gang crackdown. President Nayib Bukele says its government is stamping out gang violence, but experts document a pattern of arbitrary arrests. Now, when they say experts, they actually really don't mention any experts. They just say experts. They say things like, which is probably true in the sense that El Salvador has arrested more than 14,000 people. It says President Nayib Bukele, his push to rapidly consolidate power since he took office in 2019. His push to rapidly consolidate power. They don't mention that you do have a plenary, a Bancada, which is the Legislative Assembly. You have over 2/3 majority, I believe, about 86 approximate people that represent over 2/3 majority. What would Joe Biden have done with the 2/3 majority? What would Donald Trump have done with the 2/3 majority? By golly, they would have changed the Constitution. And as a matter of fact, so did the the Untitled, they did change several parts of the Constitution. Well, at least that dealt with certain, with the legal enforcement in the country. But the point is they're doing it, and they're doing it with a tremendous mandate from the people themselves. So just to give you an idea of, to further, mention how much the people are in favor of Bukele, the people in El Salvador. There was a Democracy Now! Video that was on April the 5th. It was with, let's see if I can get this out here, and you'll pardon me again. I wish that I was running Chiron in the back, but unfortunately I don't have the technological know-how at this point. But Amy, I forget, here, let me see. Let me put it on here.
Rights violations are growing. As we turn now to El Salvador, where concerns about human rights violations are growing.
Well, in any case, they talk about concerns where human rights violations are growing. And again, no mention of who says this, but just the simple mention, human rights violations are growing. And what she's referring to is that recently the gangs in El Salvador have created a lot of turmoil. You had 62 murders in one day. I think in 3 days it was 86 approximate murders. Random murders, vicious, violent murders by the gangs themselves. Now, we in this country can understand violence up to a point, but the gangs are extremely vicious in El Salvador and have done some very vicious things. As a matter of fact, as a result of this violence, many people were leaving El Salvador for that very reason. Not just to have a better life for their family, but literally to get away from gangs because they had been threatened. So this has been the case that El Salvador has been dealing with for many years. And finally, it was about 3 weeks ago that after these massive murders took place, coincidentally exactly when certain very wealthy individuals were coming to El Salvador to invest in infrastructure with Bitcoin and the like, it was exactly that time when the gangs did all this. Now, just a little background, the U.S. Treasury back in December 15th of 2021, just about 4 months ago, had accused Nayib Bukele of bargaining with gangs, of giving money to gangs to be able to get them to stop their violence. That's what they had accused him of. Again, no evidence. Now, the fact is there is evidence of the FMLN party and the Arena party of having given money to gangs to stop the violence. Multiple sources just within YouTube itself. I encourage you to investigate those that have shown them, but nothing, not one bit of evidence other than the U.S. Treasury says it. So I'm assuming the U.S. Treasury says it. It must be backed up by some sort of intelligence. What kind of intelligence? NSA intelligence? CIA intelligence? Different types of intelligence. From some agency which is possibly part of the deep state that has their own particular way of determining this information and sorting it out. Well, there has been a lot of evidence that the CIA and NSA have come up with. There was weapons of mass destruction. That turned out to be a lie. There was the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. That turned out to be a lie. Several, false flag methods of getting the United States involved in a war, which cost us trillions and trillions of dollars under false pretenses. So here we have U.S. Treasury accusing El Salvador or Nayib Bukele of dealing with gangs when there's absolutely no evidence. Well, now we have a situation where, yes, he's dealing with gangs in a major way. He's had created massive arrests, not just him personally, but through the Legislative Assembly. mostly 80 some odd people that are making these decisions, that are approving these. Martial law. So the question is should you have martial law? Well, in the United States, when you have a group that is arbitrarily murdering people, these are called terrorists. Not truck drivers in Canada that are blocking streets. They're considered economic terrorists, whatever that means, but we're talking people that are murdered. They're murdered by these gangs. These gangs deal in drugs. Bukele has cut off these drugs because every new drug shipment coming into El Salvador within his power is being seized and destroyed. Any of the money that is apprehended as a result of this is put into hospitals. One of them was put into a pet hospital to solve the problem of incredible, population of dogs and cats in El Salvador, just as an example. But in this case, Democracy Now! is basically saying because of these massive arrests that Bukele is in violation by every known agency in the world of some sort of trying to further his power and consolidate power. And I just want to read you some of the comments that other people have made. So here's an example. Here's a comment. By the way, there were over 1,000 comments. Let the victims speak. Those who died in the hands of these gang members, let the daughters who were abducted and raped speak. Let the young innocent men whose gang members slaughtered speak. These gang members deserve no mercy. Well, let's go to, maybe that's just one bad example, whatever. Maybe there's some that are in favor of Democracy Now's pronouncement of how evil the Bukele is. It says, let me see, one of my Salvadorian friends, a highly intelligent, well-educated, well-informed man who closely follows Salvadorian politics, has a very different opinion, one I consider to be very well-informed of Nayib Bukele's methods that does the American media in general. My friend maintains Bukele has no choice but to crack down hard on the Salvadorian gangs by nearly any means available to him due to the pervasive problem of gang violence. Okay, I'm trying to go down here because it's the computer's continually populating. Let me see. Your ways don't work in our countries, so don't try to judge them from the outside looking in and give your opinion of something you have not lived. This is the only way these countries can be saved. All I can say is this Democracy Now! Was ratioed. And when I say ratioed, it means some people were for it, some people were against it. In this case, not one person of the 1,000 people that commented on that video were for Democracy Now!'s representation of El Salvador and the way they're dealing with gangs. So everything that you are hearing around the world that deals with, from Al Jazeera, Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the LA Times, it's all based on what's coming from probably the single biggest news source adversary of El Salvador, El Faro. Why is El Faro interested in, so they say, exposing the nature of El Salvador? Well, let's talk a little bit about El Faro. In fact, let's talk about one of their chief correspondents, who also, by the way, calls himself an anthropologist. His name is Carlos Martinez Staubisson, the nephew of Roberto Staubisson, who led the Escuadrón de la Muerte. Okay, so what's the significance of that? This, back in the 1980s, they call the Cultural Revolution. CIA-backed militias were really going hard on who they considered to be leftist-leaning people in El Salvador. Consider the incredible poverty in that country, and you can understand why a lot of people just wanted to be able to eat. So you have this Staubisson who worked for the military, who committed thousands of murders, not necessarily personally, but quite a few of them, tortured and murdered incredible amounts of people under the guise of his military duty to his country. Well, the man was like a Hitler. Now, the chief correspondent and anthropologist, Carlos Martinez Staubisson, is a news journalist, young man, I believe probably in his 40s, who is no question a very, very good writer, and wrote an article about his association with his uncle, at least admitted that he had an association, that he was a relative. This article, he admitted, and I encourage you to find it because you can, it's on the internet. He admitted who his uncle was and what he had done, but in his way tried to be an apologist, in the sense that he said, well, you have to understand the time that he was in and what was at stake, and they dealt with left-leaning people in a very, very serious way, but you just have to understand these were the times that he lived in. I understand. Hitler also lived in some bad times too. But we just cannot make any apologies or anything to validate whatever they did in any way. But this is what was done. This Carlos Staubisson he's one of the chief writers for El Faro. Also, let it be known that they get most of their financing from the Open Society, which is a George Soros society. I'm sure it's an NGO that definitely has a serious agenda. Their biggest agenda is to promote the IMF. So the International Monetary Fund has a type of, you call them hitmen, that go to countries throughout Central and South America and other areas in the world and persuade people to take loans. Now, these loans are used theoretically to rebuild and help develop the country, but they have to use the people that they have to use their particular workmen to do the job. They have to use the specific, let's say BlackRock or other corporations get to do the specific work that is needed. What ultimately happens is that very, very little of the work is done. And then the countries are further in debt than they were before. So what then are they to do? Well, then the IMF gives them an opportunity. You can renegotiate the loan, but the payments are still going to ultimately be greater. Or we can put a military base in your country. Or we can drill for oil or precious metals or whatever type of natural resource this country may have to offer. This is the way that it works. So El Salvador has decided to go to a different standard, has decided to go to Bitcoin standard. They still have the dollar. Let's say the dollar, in a sense, very popular still, is like maybe a stable coin. But Bitcoin is something that is a tremendous value. It's digital gold. It finds times over maybe years sometimes where it doesn't really do much. But eventually, I believe, as does Nayib Bukele and the rest of the plenary assembly, the Tele-Aviacion, that, and I think a great many people in El Salvador itself, that this is going to lift El Salvador to incredible heights. That most likely within the next 5 to 10 years, El Salvador could be one of the richest single countries in the world. And no other leader has ever offered this sort of thing. If people consider him to be a dictator, consider that he has given them the most democratic kind of currency possible. He has given them a currency that they don't even need to keep in an exchange or a bank. They can keep it themselves, their own sovereign selves, their own cold wallet. They don't have to use the Chivo wallet or any of the other wallets that may be suggested. They can use any wallet that they want and simply put it in Bitcoin and save it for a rainy day. as I believe a lot of them are doing, and eventually, I think over the next couple of years, it's going to make a tremendous difference in many, many people's lives. So this is what is happening now, and this is what at stake in El Salvador. It's so very important that this experiment, for lack of a better word, be allowed to continue. And of course, there is always a possibility that it could continue. I understand Paraguay is one of the places also considering Bitcoin, and many other states in the United States and cities have considered promoting Bitcoin as well. It is definitely spreading. I also want to make it clear that the one act that the U.S. is probably going to pass is where they are going to, if it does pass, they're going to scrutinize El Salvador and determine if their Bitcoin is destabilizing the American dollar. And this is in stark contrast to the claim that we hear all over the Western media that he is destroying people by putting Bitcoin in as a currency because it could go down in value, or that it's extremely volatile. On one hand, we have that statement. On the other hand, we have the U.S. saying, and other media through the Treasury and through this bill that I just mentioned, the U.S. is saying that it could destabilize the dollar. Well, you can't have it both ways. If it destabilizes the dollar, it's going to enrich in El Salvador. If it's really bad for the people, and it's because it's very unstable, well then of course that's bad. But can you have it? How can it be, if it's unstable for the El Salvadorian people but going up and destabilizing the currency going down, then how is that possibly bad for the El Salvadorian people, as the Western press would attest? So this is part of what I would, just a sample of where I'm coming from in this newscast. It's very important that it be in English, because the powers that be would really like to manufacture consent to do some sort of action against El Salvador. Possibly punitive action, possibly sanctions over some supposed problem with their legal authority, some UN action. The richer El Salvador becomes, and the more problems that they have, this could be considered a direct threat to the American dollar. The American dollar has been really, really good. I personally believe the American dollar can live in tandem with Bitcoin. But it's a shame, all of the really, really, really bad press that has permeated the Western media. I mean, I would say it's 95% against El Salvador, and probably more than that. The only place you're going to find any good news about El Salvador is in YouTube from people from El Salvador, and it's a shame. And I hope there are more people that broadcast what's really going on there in English. In any case, I'm known as Tele-Aviacion, and it was my pleasure, and I hope to be doing this every week, if sometime, perhaps every couple of days. Thank you so much for listening. Have a beautiful evening.